All right, but we're back with another episode of the High Ground, powered by Premier Companies. Good morning, Sal.
Good morning. How we doing?
I am great. Hey, we got Matt Smorch back in studio with us. Matt, welcome back.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's been a while since you've been on. We like to talk about CountryMark and our Indiana-based refinery and our American-sourced crude and all of those good things. And you have several topics you want to cover today as well. So we're going to start you off, though, with a question of the day.
Okay.
Your question of the day, Matt, is what is an underrated skill everyone can benefit from?
All right. Well, hey, thanks for having me again. This is hopefully it'll be a fun conversation. When I saw the question the other day, because you did give it to me ahead of time, first thing that popped into my head is the ability to whistle. And I sat there and I'm like, okay, I can whistle like this, and that's not the whistling I'm talking about. I'm talking about the whistle that you can go
The
and
two finger.
the two fingers.
I did it last night to get my
and-
little girl. She's about 100 yards away, and I did it last night.
and to get a crowd under control and all of that. And the thing is that I hang out with my wife a lot. I had to brag on her because she can do it. And she can whistle very loud. I tried to actually do a recording of it, and it didn't come out that great. But she can whistle, and so when I'm around and I need someone to help get
Settle
people
them down.
attention, she'll do it. She said she took a summer to practice, and she learned it when she was about 9 years old, and it took her all summer to figure that out. So
Outstanding.
I tell you, it's hard to teach. I don't know
It-
how many people I've tried to teach, and I don't really think about how I do it. And it's so hard to teach somebody how to do it. And but it's funny you said that because I just used it last night. My girl was
That's-
down there; she's out there playing by the pond, and we was getting ready to leave, and I lit her up with a good whistle, let her know it's time.
yeah, that's good.
That's
So-
good. That's a good one.
That is a good
That
one.
is a good
Hey,
one.
that's
That's
the
better
first-
than mine.
That's the first thing that popped into my head when I saw that. So
That's
it was
funny.
It was great.
That's better than mine. Sal, what do you have?
I thought about this. Mine's not as good as that one, but just the ability to communicate.
Yeah.
And to look folks and be comfortable with talking to people. And reason why, because I had kind of forgot what we'd assigned, looked at them again this morning, and we just had the science fair at our local elementary yesterday and last night. And those kids they're 4th through 6th grade, and just to be able to talk to folks that they don't know and explain a project and answer questions and be comfortable with just with communicating and getting the message across. I think that's just to be comfortable talking to folks. I think that's an underutilized skill, underappreciated
Sure.
skill.
Well, mine kind of falls in the same as yours then, but a little different. And I struggle with this one. This is why I used it. But the ability to know how to accurately punctuate.
Oh, as you look
I
at
mean,
me.
Well, I am if I think I would breathe right here in that sentence, I will shove a comma in there. I will force commas on sentences faster than anyone. And so, yeah, whether you use a semicolon or a colon or however, it's just, man, I think it's so nice to read when somebody knows how to punctuate. I do not.
I was proofreading one of my wife's papers when she was finishing her degree, second degree, and I put on there, I was like, death by comma, because she had about every sentence had about 2 or 3 scattered through there, it seemed like. But
Well,
they're
seem appropriate.
convenient. They're just,
well, and they look decent in all senses. So you're like, well, that's got to be I took a breath right there, comma. So,
I like it.
Hey, I'm partial to the semicolon instead of comma, so you'll see that.
Oh,
next
nice.
time, so.
I'm
No,
bad
that's
with
good.
dashes. I don't know why. I'm kind of that way too. If it looks like a comma and I'm not really sure, I'll put a dash in for some way, which is totally not.
no, it's no,
Yeah.
none of that's
No.
kosher.
I'll
Nope,
use the
it's
dash
not.
every once in a while.
So-
That's not bad either. If you go and you use any Microsoft product, it'll correct you nowadays. Anyway.
It does do some of that correcting, but I like to do some of that on my own. I hate to see the little squigglies and the little highlighted stuff. I'm like, I'm doing this on my own.
You're the
I never
ignore.
do that. I'm like,
Ignore.
I'm never. Yeah, change, please change. My God, just write it for me. So
funny.
anyway, all right, enough on that. Matt, we brought you in. We got some stuff top of mind that we want to talk about. We're going to focus around the RFS today, and you can remind everybody what that is, and we'll just kind of kick it to you on what's front of mind and most important currently.
Okay, so Renewable Fuel Standard, the wonderful RFS, something that I talk about almost every day in my job. You would think that a rule or a law that got passed would not necessarily get into conversation every day, but in our business, it seems like it's always a topic. So what the Renewable Fuel Standard, it basically it requires obligated parties, and I'll get into that in a minute. It requires obligated parties to blend renewable fuel into their gasoline and diesel fuel. That's the uncomplicated, high level what the Renewable Fuel Standard is. The thing is that with any law, it's not real simple. It's a very complex. It's a complex rule, and it has a lot of different nuances to it. First thing is that so for this year, every year the EPA puts out standards, and they require a certain amount of percentage for for obligated parties to blend. So I think for 2023, the proposed percentage is around 12%. That's not the exact number, but it's around 12%. That 12% renewable fuel is needs to be blended in both your gasoline and the diesel fuel that you produce or you import into the country. So as a refiner, CountryMark owns a refinery. We are an obligated party. And when I look at our ownership, and I tend to remind our cooperative owners, is that you own a refinery. And so therefore, by extension, the whole system is an obligated party. We are obligated to go and blend renewable fuels.
Is just refining what makes you obligated?
Just refining or importing fuel for sale into the country.
Okay.
So we're an obligated party. That means anybody else that's in that supply chain, whether it's a biodiesel manufacturer, an ethanol manufacturer, or any of that, they're not obligated. They're just selling their product. Okay.
So I got a question. Sorry.
Sure. No, please.
Slow class down. So if the EPA sets this standard and our Environmental Protection Agency, you would think that it's for a good reason. Why? I mean, tell us kind of why they have this standard of 12% in 2023.
Well, the EPA and part of the law was to go and it was for energy security in the United States, because at the time when the law was made in 2007, you could see that growth in gasoline and diesel fuel was going, straight up. And this was and we were very dependent on foreign oil. This was before fracking and the shale and all of that stuff. So this was way before any of that, what I would call revolution in the energy space in the United States. And so the way they set up the law was to have increased amounts of renewable fuels blended every year. And it was, so part of that was that for increase in energy security. The other part is to go and start to lower the carbon content of fuels. And so different levels of fuel got counted differently. So a lot of people think that the RFS is just about ethanol and corn-based ethanol. And it's not just corn-based ethanol. So there's 4 categories of renewable fuel that they require you to blend. The first one, the smallest part is cellulosic fuel. So back in the day, they wanted to go and have spur cellulosic fuel production, and hopefully through the RFS would incentivize this growth of cellulosic fuel. The technology exists. It never has gotten to be extremely commercialized. And so throughout the entire RFS, the cellulosic fuel requirement that was put in the rule has never been met. It's a fraction of what Congress had anticipated originally.
And for our listeners that don't know, cellulosic is something that grows. It's a native grass. It's a sort of
Yeah, so cellulosic is so if you take ethanol, corn starch based ethanol is like a simple renewable fuel, and if you were to go and make ethanol out of the corn stover,
Oh,
then which the technology you can do that, and you have it's more it takes more time, it takes more energy to get the ethanol produced, but you could produce it from corn stover and non sugar type uh, items, switchgrass, things like that you wouldn't think. Technology exists. It's just that it can't do it at scale, and it's really not commercial from a cost standpoint. The other thing that is a cellulosic fuel today is renewable natural gas. And so renewable natural gas, which companies are doing with digesters at dairies or hog farms, they're producing natural gas. It's renewable from the manure. And then if they get that into the natural gas system and someone used that fuel for compressed natural gas for transportation, then they can generate a credit.
okay.
So there's cellulosic fuel, there's advanced biofuels, which the advanced biofuel category was a fuel that would reduce the carbon it was the carbon footprint or the greenhouse gas emissions by 50%. I think it was 50%. And so things that would do that, biodiesel, renewable diesel, those are the predominant fuels that are advanced. Also, like sugarcane ethanol that's made in Brazil, it gets imported into this country. That also fits in the advanced category for renewable fuels.
Why wouldn't that be cellulosic?
It's still a sugar based fuel.
Okay, got it.
And then there's bio-based diesel, which bio-based diesel is biodiesel and renewable diesel primarily. And so those kind of overlap. That this is the complexity of the rule, is that there's 4 different categories, but they're nested, and you can use credits in ones for compliance and others and all of that stuff. So
This seems simple, Matt. I'm not sure
it's
what the hang up is.
Oh my!
So, and that's the thing. It's just, and that's where the complexity of is an obligated party. You gotta keep track of all of these things and try to, make sure you're in compliance, and then also minimize your compliance cost.
Is a refinery automatically set up to run these products just from the get go, like a crude oil refinery that was built 50 years ago? Does it run this stuff automatically?
It does not. And we've looked at a lot of different ways to run renewable type feedstocks in our refinery, and it's not always compatible, because the one thing that you got to think about is that renewable feedstock, like a soybean oil or ethanol, they have oxygen in them. Okay, any of the natural type feedstocks, there's oxygen that's part of that material. Well, if you take oxygen and then you have hydrocarbons like gasoline and diesel fuel, those things you don't necessarily mix together all the time, right? Because that ends up having bad things happen, like that you try to avoid in a refinery.
Right,
So,
for sure.
so it's not compatible. It's not like you can just plug it into the refinery and run it. And so, it is a challenge from a CountryMark perspective. The other thing that's a challenge of this is that it's not just ethanol into gasoline, which if it was just ethanol into gasoline at a percentage, that wouldn't be a problem, because CountryMark, I mean, we sell E15 at some of our branded stations, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But so we blend a fairly decent percentage of ethanol in the gasoline that we sell. The thing is that percentage also goes into the diesel fuel you make, and so it's just not gasoline. It's both your gasoline and your diesel fuel. Well, at CountryMark, I mean, we're farmer-owned cooperative.
Diesel.
we're diesel. We're diesel centric. Our business is based on diesel. And so when you look at what are the opportunities for us to blend, we'll blend biodiesel, but it's been very expensive of late because there's a lot of with renewable diesel becoming more prevalent and going to California, and there's a whole lot of stuff with that. The feedstocks are expensive, and the fuel itself is expensive. We do not produce biodiesel. We're looking at ways that we could make renewable diesel or co-process some feedstocks at the refinery, and manage those in a couple of our process units. But to get 10 to 12% biodiesel or renewable diesel in today's world, it's difficult to do and make it cost effective. So when we look at it, we can blend with our total obligation, we can blend about 50% of what we're required to blend. And that's about it. The other part of that is that we have to buy credits. Okay. And these credits are called a RIN, R-I-N. Okay. They're called Renewable Identification Number. Every gallon of renewable fuel has a number attached to it that's something like 32 characters long. Okay. It's just the tracking system for the renewable fuel.
Every gallon?
Yeah. It's every gallon, every batch.
Wow.
They all have associated really long numbers with it.
Like a lot number or something.
Like a lot. Yeah, exactly. And so that kind of follows it along. So the manufacturer, of ethanol or biodiesel, when they generate the renewable fuel, it gets the RIN attached to it. It gets purchased by someone that's going to blend it, whether you're obligated or not obligated. You blend the fuel. Once you blend the fuel, you separated that RIN from the physical gallon. And then that piece of paper now could be used for compliance, like CountryMark has to do, or it can be traded and sold to someone else.
To somebody that needs it more than you do.
Well, sold to someone that's an obligated party that needs to have this to show that they're compliant.
Oh my gosh.
It's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, pretty cool.
Spit take.
I mean,
I thought I'd wait till he had a mouthful.
Yeah.
God.
Nice try. Well, that's the thing. When you sit back and look at it, it's kind of like, yeah, okay, this makes sense. It makes a market to go and have compliance. The problem with it is that now you have a whole lot of non-obligated parties that now we've had this regime for well over 10 years, 15 years, and people that are non-obligated are using that and using the rules to their advantage, which they should, to go and be able to either discount their fuel and sell it to people because they can get the RIN and then they can sell it to the obligated party. And so, I like your face.
Yeah.
That's the way it is.
That's appropriate.
Oh my gosh.
Here's an example. An example is an ethanol producer. Okay. Well, they can blend and sell E85 at their facility. Okay. Well, when they blend they make the E85 and sell that, they basically are the blender of record and they get the RIN credit.
And they're not an obligated
At
party.
no cost.
And they're not an obligated party. So what they can do is they can sell the E85 at a steeply discounted price. Okay. And then they have the RIN in the other hand, and they can sell the RIN to the obligated party, and they're whole. Either way. Okay. So, and we can talk about that a little bit on how E15 is made, but that's what's happening out in the retail space, is that non-obligated parties are taking advantage of not having to have RINs for their compliance, which that's what it's a business model that they can do, and they're giving some of that value back to the customer, but believe me, they're not giving all of that value back to the customer.
Is loophole the right word to use here?
I wouldn't
Not really.
I wouldn't call it a loophole. I just think that it's the way that the structure has been set up, and people are using it for the advantage of their business.
Was it unintended consequence of the
I,
law? Maybe.
I would say it's somewhat of an unintended
Yeah.
consequence of the law.
Probably sounds better than loophole.
It probably. Well, I also look at it, if you're an obligated party, at times I look at it as a massive transfer of wealth. And so it's basically taking money away from CountryMark and our cooperative members, and it's transferring it to other non-obligated parties. I mean, if you think about it from a CountryMark standpoint, our cost for the RFS compliance with all the blending that we do, like I said, we can blend 50% of our obligation, but we have to buy credits, and these credits are not inexpensive. They run about $1.50 to anywhere between $1.50 and $1.80 the last few years. And that adds up, and our total compliance cost is $50-60 million. Okay. That's just for the cost for what we're, all the blending, everything we're doing. So $50-60 million when on a normal year, CountryMark, we make, I think on average we're making maybe $40-50 million over the course of 20 years. There's been some highs, there's been some really lows. Okay. But $50 million is not insignificant. And that money is basically, when we look at it and we share in our profitability with the membership and then along in the countryside, that money goes and it stays local in Indiana, and it gets down to the countryside and the ownership of the cooperative system. So I look at it and say, yeah, that it's a high cost that we have as a cooperative system, and it's basically getting taken away from people's pockets. And we're and we're a farmer-owned cooperative. And so I look at it and say, it's kind of ironic that a renewable fuels standard, which is good and has helped grow rural businesses and really supported rural communities, and ethanol and biodiesel have done that, and we've been big supporters of that at CountryMark even before the RFS came about. It's been really good, but you fast forward 15 years, and now it's detrimental to the same people that were supportive of it at the beginning. And if there's anything, I mean, if people are a part of the premier companies or any of our other member co-ops, they should know they own a refinery and that they're obligated as part of the RFS. So some of that is taking away money from them, if that makes sense.
I think I have a question. So,
Sure.
So since you're since CountryMark is an obligated party, could you even start an ethanol plant?
No, we could.
You could. Would you get the RIN?
Well,
See? Right?
we could operate. Well, it doesn't. See, every time we've looked at ethanol, and we've looked at ethanol multiple times, investments in ethanol, and every time we've looked at it, and we've looked at it how you is integrated with the refinery. The RIN isn't necessarily free because you got to look at it as a standalone business.
Mm-hmm.
And every time we've looked at it, the return has been it's been an okay return, but it hasn't been the return that we've wanted to go after. And ethanol people will, I mean, that business is cyclical too.
Yeah.
And so when you look at it over time, the return on investment is like, 10, maybe 15% return. It's not, that's over. They have really good years and they have really bad years. I mean, that's how the cyclical business works. When you're in energy and you start to be in energy, I've been in this for over 30 years, and it's a cyclical business. And that's the thing. You have to do well when times are good, and then you have to be prepared for the downside because you're always going to have a downside. So
do you think there's still a lot of misunderstanding about what E15 is and that kind of biodiesel, and there's still some apprehension and some misunderstandings?
yeah, and really, biodiesel today. Well, this is the one thing. I'll just make this comment on biodiesel. Biodiesel is a good product if with today people that are producing biodiesel do it very high quality and do a good job with it. I think. At least the product that we purchase at CountryMark, because we're big on quality and making sure everything's is good. But I will tell you, people have very long memories, as you know. And so if they had biodiesel that was bad 10 years ago, they
Still
won't.
bad.
It's still bad today. Okay. Renewable diesel is becoming more prevalent, but like I said earlier, most of it goes out to California because they have a low carbon fuel standard, which that could be a whole podcast on its own.
Write that down.
Yeah,
I
there you
am.
go. I'll have someone else come in and talk about
There you
that if you want. But that's a total fungible product, and like I said, CountryMark is investigating whether we could do some co-processing or do some renewable diesel production as well. As far as E15 and the ethanol side of it goes, the big thing with E15 is there's a when you look at gasoline, you have to look at the vapor pressure of gasoline. They call it Reid Vapor Pressure, RVP. You'll hear RVP thrown about. It's really the volatility of the fuel. So when you go and you fill up your gas tank, you see some of those vapors coming out.
Mm-hmm.
That is the volatility of the fuel. Okay. And so the EPA controls the vapor pressure to minimize the amount of vapors that come off of the gasoline, like when you're fueling or when you got it in your gas can or things like that.
Yeah, especially the bad new gas cans that, right? I mean, that's going to solve the world's problems.
That's right. That's right. The ones that are
So we spill it on the ground instead of
that leak all over
Yeah.
the
That
place.
leak everywhere. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So, so they regulate the vapor pressure of the fuel, which is for air quality and things like that. E15 has not. So E10 in the Clean Air Act, the Clean Air Act, basically for the vast majority of where we're at in Indiana, the vapor pressure for gasoline is 9 pounds per square inch. Okay. But if you make a 10% blend of of gasoline with ethanol, so 10% ethanol, 90% gasoline, you get a 1 pound waiver, so you can have it at 10 pounds per square inch. Okay. So you can actually have a higher RVP. That is written in the Clean Air Act. And that was because when they did those modifications, part of that is that ethanol was going to become, ethanol is, for the most part, everywhere we're at, it's 10% ethanol in gasoline. It's part of the gasoline pool. Okay. And that's basically when you go to buy gasoline, you're buying 10% ethanol gasoline primarily. Okay. E15 does not get that, even though the vapor pressure would be similar to a 10% blend. The E15 from a legislative standpoint doesn't get that 1 pound waiver. And so it would have to be at 9 pounds. And the ethanol industry has said that, well, that just prevents E15 from being sold year round because we can't sell it in the summer, even though there are fuels out there that are lower RVP that you could make E15 and sell it and be under 9. If you chose to go get the blend stock for it. Okay, it's just not as prevalent because right now lower RVP gasoline is either reformulated gasoline in big cities, and there's some lower vapor pressure gasoline down south. Okay, not necessarily in our area, if that makes sense.
Why?
Just some well, in the big cities they had ozone problems and they had
The smog
problems, and so they went with reformulated gasoline, which is more expensive to make and more stringent on the vapor pressure and other things that are in it. And then other areas did the same thing from a environmental standpoint.
But if the E15 burns cleaner, right? Isn't that one of the things that it burns cleaner? Why wouldn't they want to include that just like the E10 with the vapor pressure waiver?
Well, so burns cleaner or not, I guess it's got 5% more renewable fuel.
Yeah. Well, there
So
you
I
go.
get,
That's
so
true.
it's
Even if it was the
fundamentally
same.
it's
Yeah.
reduced the carbon intensity of the fuel. It's just that we can't get a good agreement from the to move forward with between ethanol refining industry and all of that, just to get legislative fix to that. I'm supportive of giving E15 a 1 pound waiver, but at the same time, when I look at the renewable fuel standard and the huge cost that it takes for CountryMark and takes away from the cooperative system, I would like to see more comprehensive legislation that could move everything forward. And so so E15 could get a waiver, and then also put some guardrails around the RFS so that it's not so costly. But comprehensive legislation in this day and age
Yeah.
is not going to happen. Okay.
They don't talk.
They don't talk, and having anything that's going to be good for liquid fuels as a whole is going to be difficult, because if you look at the way the world is, and we're not going to talk necessarily about electrification, but the Biden administration just came out yesterday with more stringent rules that they basically said we are driving the world to electric vehicles. Okay. And the rules are being set up to drive to electric vehicles. And the playing field is not, it's tilted towards that, and not necessarily towards liquid fuels and making liquid fuels better, which we could do tomorrow if we want. But people have to have the political will to go and do something comprehensive from a liquid fuel standpoint.
You wouldn't want to hold your breath that long.
No, I wouldn't want to either.
No.
So what we do is we tend to go and get into these skirmishes on issues that are less comprehensive. So one is E15 in the 1 pound waiver.
It's a Band-Aid.
That's a Band-Aid.
Yep.
So what has happened is that in the Midwest, there's been 8 Midwestern states. So in the Clean Air Act, you can go to the EPA and you can ask them to get rid of the 1 pound waiver for 10% ethanol blends to improve the air quality. 8 governors in this area, not Indiana, but the surrounding areas, states, have requested that the 1 pound waiver for E10 goes away. Okay. And the way that the Clean Air Act is that if states request that, the EPA is basically going to allow that to happen. Okay. So EPA just put out a rule that said, yeah, we're going to get rid of the 1 pound waiver for E10, and we'll implement it in 2024 because they're worried about supply in the areas. Okay. So now E15 and E10 will be on the same vapor pressure. Okay. And it'll be, in our area, it would be a required 9 pound RVP. Okay. So that's it ended up being on the same thing. The issue with that is that the vast majority to go in for those 8 states, that ends up creating a new boutique fuel for just a certain area of the country. Okay.
And that's cost effective.
Yeah. It's going to be more, it will be more expensive. It will be more expensive to manufacture. And the way that the distribution system is in the country is that there's only so many grades of gasoline that you can stick through all the pipelines and everything that move fuel around the country.
Because you have told us that in another podcast.
That's right. We've had
we know that
on our pipeline.
Yep.
So it's not set up from a segregation standpoint, and so in those areas, they'll end up getting lower RVP gasoline, which could be used then, and you could sell E10 or E15 using that same base fuel. The problem with that is that it's going to be more expensive to manufacture. Okay, because what you have to do is you got to remove that lighter end of the gasoline to make the vapor pressure lower. So that's going to decrease the volume that you can produce. And it takes more energy to get those light ends out of the fuel. And some refiners will have to do some modification to be able to do that day in and day out. And actually at our refinery, we've done some test runs. We can do it. I just wonder if at the maximum rates that we'd like to run, if we can do that day in and day out without putting in some extra capital and modifications there. But when we look at it from a CountryMark standpoint, and we're a small refiner, just assuming that we don't have to spend any money from a capital standpoint to modify how we produce gasoline, it's going to cost us well over $10 million a year to be able to go and produce a lower RVP gasoline. It's probably in the range of $10 to $20 million a year. And that's like right off the top of our profitability.
Forever, not a one-time investment. That's
not
annual.
a one-time. That's just annual costs. And so that cost, I mean, for us, that's 10 to, I think I looked at it. It's like 10 to 20 cents a gallon more. It's somewhere in that range. I was going to do the math and I forgot to do it before I came in here, but it's not a small cost to be able to do it. Now, even though Indiana did not join on with the other 8 Midwestern states, we still supply some in Illinois, and we still supply in Ohio, and so we're looking at how do we optimize that so we can at least not take that big of a penalty. So it's not necessarily inexpensive to do. I know that I've read other information, and that's the whole thing. You can always have studies. It's like if you ask the right question, you'll get the answer you want.
Yeah.
So I know that the ethanol industry has done some studies and says, yeah, it's only going to cost a couple cents. The refining industry has done some studies, and it's going to cost 12 to 20 cents, and a lot more. And so it's it's going to raise the price of gasoline in those areas. I don't know what it's going to end up being, whether it's a nickel or 20 cents. It's going to raise the price of gasoline in those areas. The thing that is more bothersome to me, the way I look at it, is that the efficiency of our system, the whole, not just CountryMark system, but the entire refining distribution system in the United States, is that we have pipelines and we can get volume of gasoline to where it needs to be. Quick, and we can do that well. When you add another layer of complexity to it, that starts to put supply at risk. And when we looked at it, it's even like last fall when we had diesel inventories were really low, and Tucker Carlson got on and said that, we only had 24 days of diesel supply left, and everybody's like, oh gosh, we're running out of diesel fuel. We didn't run out of diesel fuel, but inventories in the nation were very low. And once inventories get low, it's hard to get the inventories where they need to be at the time that they need to be, if that makes sense.
It's a wrong amount in the wrong place.
That's right. So I look at it and say, okay, we're going to add complexity to gasoline now in the Midwest. There is a high likelihood that there will be supply issues in my mind. That there's a good chance that there would be supply issues. And even EPA recognized that and said, we're not going to implement this for 2023. We're going to push it to 2024.
Because they're worried
that there's going to be supply issues. Well, it takes 2 to 3 years to modify how you operate if you have to spend capital at a refinery. So there's still an opportunity or a possibility that we're going to have supply disruptions in 2024 if this goes into effect. So that's kind of the way I look at it, is that it's not necessarily it's not cost driven. It might be a supply issue, and then when you have low supply, what happens to the cost? It goes way up, and so they kind of go hand in hand.
So a lot of this conversation is based around things that you're having to do as a business to meet these legislative requirements and these regulations. So you mentioned you're a small refinery.
Yep.
What has happened with the small refinery exemptions? Can you tell us about that? Because that was that was helpful, and then it became toxic. It almost.
Well, no, you just said toxic. I was like thinking of the third rail, and I got to stop. That one came from left field. No, I'm just-
This is even worse than the cattle than Ryan Batt.
can we go back to talk about E15?
Yeah, we had Ryan Batt in here from United Producers, and he was talking about black cows versus other colored cows,
Right.
and that was a third rail.
Right, so
Yeah.
can you talk about this without getting political and or upset? There's your challenge.
Okay, there you go. No, small refinery exemptions. About a year or so ago, EPA came out and they retroactively, they came out and they said, no, there's no. Okay, let me take a step back. Smaller refinery exemptions were written into the law as a safeguard for small refineries. Okay, understanding that compliance with a new regime would potentially put small refiners at risk in a big industry. Okay. Like CountryMark, I mean, we run 35,000 barrels a day. The average refinery is over 150,000 barrels a day. And people don't, I mean, we process almost 18 million barrels a day of crude in this country. 18 million barrels. So multiply a barrel by 42 gallons. We use a lot of gasoline and diesel in this country.
Wow.
Okay. And we're small. So they put that in as kind of a safety net for small refiners if the compliance costs got too big for them. And we, CountryMark, in the past, we had applied and received small refinery exemptions. They were always after the fact. It never changed our behavior of how we would blend gasoline or ethanol in the gasoline or biodiesel in the diesel. It was just from a fiduciary standpoint, because of the high cost, can we get an exemption in that? We're still going to blend renewables regardless. And I think the vast majority of the system would still continue to blend renewables regardless of exemptions. A year ago, the EPA came out and basically said that small refiners, when we submit the application, we were supposed to prove that we had disproportionate economic hardship. Okay. It didn't mean we had to go out of business, but we had disproportionate economic hardship compared to other people in the industry. And EPA came out and they did a study that we disagree with that basically says, well, everybody pays the same and they can pass all the costs to the consumer. And so everybody's compliance cost is the same. So there's no such thing as disproportionate economic hardship. So even though we gave them information to show that we're not getting market price at times, they just basically said, no, you're all paying the same. Don't come asking anymore. And so right now that is being contended and it's going through the court system. And we probably won't know resolution of that for another year or two. So we'll see what happens with small refinery exemptions. But once again, it's one of these things that it's kind of a squabble, and it is kind of the third rail of the Renewable Fuel Standard, because the ethanol industry hates them and they think it takes away from ethanol blending. I think the refining industry looks at the numbers and says it doesn't really change ethanol blending. And if I look at all the numbers, it doesn't change ethanol blending. E15 is really slow to take on. Part of that is the RVP issue. The other part of it is infrastructure and how we sell it.
Which requires a changing of the stations.
It could.
It could.
It could.
Yeah, depending on when they were
'cause
built. Yeah.
That's right. Because you and I
we
know
own
that,
them. So.
Yeah, Premier owns a couple and sell the E15 at a number of stations. So it takes infrastructure at the
You
station.
can't just throw it in a tank that's been
Separate
there
tank.
since 1985.
Yeah, that's right. So, I mean, it does take money, and most people don't like even CountryMark. I mean, we have like 125 branded stations that sell our branded fuel. We don't own any of those. Either our members own them or third parties own them. And typically, people don't understand that gas stations are owned by someone that maybe owns 2 or 3 gas stations, and they don't have the money to put infrastructure in to do E15. So part of that is that is part of it, is that infrastructure costs. Those that do put in infrastructure at the retail level, they'll sell E85 and they'll sell E10, and they will blend those two to make E15 in a blender pump. Okay. The issue that I have with some of that is that the E85, there's really like if you buy it from CountryMark, it's all vapor pressure controlled. Everything is good. But if you buy it from direct from an ethanol company, like I was talking about before, where they can go and sell it at a discount and then sell the RIN to like a company like CountryMark, they don't necessarily have the specifications that we follow. And so that vapor pressure of that E15 blend may be high anyway, just based on how the E85 was manufactured. So in the this 8 Midwestern states that wanted to go and do E15 year round, and they're doing it because of the environmental benefit of lowering the RVP of gasoline, may still have E15 that is above the vapor pressure limit, just based on the E85 that's being blended. How's that for confusing?
You know, we started this.
I know. We went all over the place, right?
We started this with Renewable Fuel Standard of 2023 is 12% renewable fuel. That seemed pretty easy.
Yep.
But then we ended up about 30 minutes later with,
Right.
But so what is the fix? I bet you've got a fix for all this.
You know, I think I've
if you could be king for a day.
If I could be king for a day, I would definitely. I think that there's an opportunity for comprehensive legislation to be done that would help liquid fuels, would help the automotive industry to continue to make vehicles for liquid fuels, internal combustion engines. It would compete with electric vehicles from an emission standpoint. And it's the raised octane level of gasoline, the octane standard. And there's been legislation the last couple of sessions in Congress that have been presented, and I think that the bones of those legislative efforts are good, but then when you get into the details of it, there's no consensus between all the stakeholders that are involved. And when you look at something that's going to be comprehensive from a liquid fuel standpoint, you have to have ethanol involved, you have to have biodiesel involved, you have to have refiners involved, you have to have all those, and the automotive guys to be involved, and you get all of those people in a room, and if you can all agree on the high level principle of raise the gasoline octane standard to 95 octane, and then figure out all the details underneath. And I think what ends up happening is everybody looks at the details underneath and says,
what it's going to cost me.
Well, yeah, and I'm not going to talk to you because some of these are non-starters.
I don't like those.
I don't like those.
For sure.
And so but I think that there's enough room to say, hey, we can all have 95 octane, and it would be a benefit for emissions. We could go and say, hey, set up a rule where you can incentivize reducing the carbon intensity of your fuel, which could drive higher blends of ethanol or drive innovation on making better fuels for the system, and do it by an incentive as opposed to a mandate. Because we've learned, at least in our business, that the mandated approach is really cost ineffective, and it doesn't really drive infrastructure or change, because
drives bad behavior.
It drives, exactly.
I mean, if you think about it, the RIN, there are people that believe that the high RIN cost, the credit cost, will drive the infrastructure. Okay, it'll drive people to invest in infrastructure, and if that's the case, then we would already have the infrastructure there, because we've people would have put it in there already. And it's not the case. It's an ineffective way to drive any change or infrastructure. And so it's just been kind of a stalemate. And I think that doing something that's a step change would actually drive people to go and increase the percentage. Like if we went to a 95 octane gasoline standard, Indiana would go to 15% ethanol relatively quickly. And you wouldn't have to go and change out a bunch of retail infrastructure. You could come to a CountryMark terminal and buy E15 right from the terminal, because that's what we sell it today. No one really buys it,
Right.
but we have it available to sell. And you would just replace the 10% blend with the E15 blend, and then the gasoline station owner doesn't have to make a huge investment in infrastructure.
And ultimately, you've stretched that runway out of all of this RFS standard, and you've started to check those boxes of the reduction of carbon and all that, because ultimately, you would tend to believe that the car companies are not as excited about producing electric vehicles as their commercials would lead you to believe, and this would allow them to stay with relatively the same factory processes that they with internal combustion engines on. Because if you look at car commercials now, you're led to believe that every car company out there is pretty excited about making electric vehicles. I can't imagine they really are. If this could be a fix for everyone in the chain.
Well, I not to speak for the automakers, but I mean the way that the policymakers in Washington are tilting the playing field to electric vehicles anyway, so they have to get on board.
They've got to go.
They got to do it.
Yeah.
It was interesting that you talk about the electric car vehicles, and I can't remember which or commercials, and I can't remember which one it was, but I see it on TV, and then I heard the same commercial on the radio, and at the end of the radio it said, "Yeah, car not available for sale until 2024." So I kind of laughed.
Well,
It's
everything
like,
seems so trendy anymore. It doesn't matter. It seems like it's across the culture. It's just pop culture. It just comes so quickly. And I say until we have a bad event like a hurricane or something like that, where folks can't get to where they want to go with an electric vehicle and that technology, it's good to have all these different options. And I think it's a good thing.
right.
And there's probably need for these, but until we can replace a combustion engine with something that's reliable and
well, I drove by a place the other day and I saw a car parked plugged in the evening. It was parked by the house. And I thought, back when I was a kid, I remember we had a rash of people siphoning gasoline out of cars at one point in time. I thought, how long is it going to be before the big thing is just go and plug people's cars?
Why is my light bill so high?
Just
And your neighbor's got a big orange cord.
Yeah, what is he doing? Why are they plugged into my shop?
Well, and
Your Christmas lights dim.
Yeah, just real quick though. I worry about it though too, is that the electrification of automobiles is about reducing gasoline. It's not about reducing diesel fuel. Right. And so if you think about the constituents, and this is kind of where we started, if you think about who we sell to, CountryMark and Premier and our diesel co-op members, it's diesel centric, and we're selling to the agriculture. And I will say that I don't believe that farm equipment is going to become electrified anytime soon. And so you have to have some gasoline if you're going to make diesel fuel. And so I look at it as a totally protectionism for the CountryMark system as a whole, to make sure that we have diesel fuel for the people that we serve.
And there is your positive at the end of all that.
That's right.
That's it.
He tied it all together with a nice bow on that.
Sounds good.
You got anything else for him, Sal?
I do, but I've got so many questions. It just seems like every time we have Mr. Smorch in here, I've got so many questions that you work in a complicated industry, you have a complicated job, but thank you for providing us with energy that we need.
You've been a big advocate for that industry all the way to the Supreme Court. I think that's we can't go without saying that CountryMark, as we think about CountryMark, a refinery in Indiana, farmer owned, with a presence in the Supreme Court and on their call list of how does this feel to you from a legislative standpoint, from all of that you're right at the table all the time. So kudos to you.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I will offer you, if you ever want to have me over again, and you can just, I was thinking about this on my drive up when I was sitting in traffic, is you could just do a rapid fire question portion of that, and we'll just go for it.
That's be fun.
So he would have questions of the day.
Yes.
Questions of the day. You could just pelt me with them.
I like
good
it.
to me.
That's all
Sounds
I've
good
got,
to me.
Ryan.
Matt, thank you so much for coming in. It's always a pleasure. We will have you back.
All right. I appreciate it. Thank you.
All right, everyone.
Thanks,
That's another episode of the High Ground powered by Premier Companies. Please like and subscribe.